Now, the rest of the story. Joanie Molinski. She had waited such a long time to have a real date with a real boy. She had waited until her freshman year at Connecticut College. In fact, it was to be a blind date. But that was okay. The girl who had fixed it up had promised he's an adorable boy from Yale. So, Joanie, the perpetual outsider, maybe for the first time in her lonely, longing life, got her hopes way up. For the big evening, she wore her best gray flannel dress with matching gray flannel shoes. Primping in the mirror, she frowned at her ample 132 pounds, then tugged at her clothing, vainly attempting to conceal it. When her girlfriend excitedly called out, "He's here," Joanie caught her breath. With all of the poise that she could muster, began descending the dormitory stairway. Now they were face to face, she and the young man who was about to make up for all of the years of alienation and humiliation. And the adorable boy from Yale, who might have made her fondest dreams come true, or at least ought to have left them undisturbed, turned to Joanie's girlfriend, the one who had arranged the blind date, and with an expression of disgust admonished aloud, "Why didn't you tell me?" The rest of the evening the boy protested his predicament by utterly ignoring Joanie. And then after a brief while that seemed a lifetime for both, he was gone. For him, the awkward experience may have rendered a crude story or two for friends back at Yale before it was dismissed and forgotten. But not for Joanie. For her, the nightmare blind date lived on in eyes that yearned for the happiness they saw in others' lives, in a heart that ached for all that it was not allowed to share, in lips now certain they would never smile again. But this is the rest of the story. Years later, Joanie Molinski has a life and a home, and yes, a loving husband of her own. She's giving a large dinner party. Among her invited guests is a female acquaintance whom she's not seen in years, never met the woman's husband, she thinks. And into Joanie's house they walk. That's right. The husband, now a bald, fat, 40-something doctor, was once the adorable boy from Yale who broke Joanie Molinski's heart. And more startling still, he does not remember Joanie. Does not even remember her. An obvious cheater, he proceeded to make passes at his hostess. He tried to get her alone in the kitchen, stares lecherously, makes physical contact wherever possible, offers incredibly "let me help you" without suggesting precisely how. No, Joanie does not attempt to remind him of that dreadful evening years before, nor after this one will she ever see him again. But he will see her. The emotions he conjured would inspire a screenplay entitled "The Girl Most Likely To." Yes, Joanie Molinski's screenplay about an ugly duckling girl who grows up to become a swan of sorts, and then murders every boy who ever slighted her. For years now you have been delighted by the brash self-confidence of the star Joanie Molinski became, but today you have met the impossible dreamer, the shy, scared, forgettable girl behind the quick smile and the lightning quip who one day would call herself Joan Rivers. Only now you know the rest of the story.
And now the rest of the story. Joan Alexandra Molinski was born on June the 8th, 1933 in Brooklyn, New York. Joan was an overweight child who struggled with her body image throughout her whole life. Her parents were Jewish Russian immigrants. Her father, Mayor Molinski, was a doctor. Her mother, Beatrice, was a homemaker who was absolutely obsessed with status. Joan attended Brooklyn Society for Ethical Culture School, then Adelphi Academy of Brooklyn, a college prep school. She performed in the school cavalcades, and in 1949, 16-year-old Joan was president of the school's drama club. She graduated in 1951. In the 1951-52 school year, Joan was a chubby freshman at Connecticut College when the blind date picked her up at her dorm, turned to his friend, and in disgust asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" That comment was seared into Joan's mind. In an interview with Howard Stern, Joan explained that when she was growing up, looks mattered. If you got cut off from access to men and money, and from men as the route to money, you were dead in the water. In 1952 or 1953, Joan transferred to Barnard College, where she graduated in 1954 with a bachelor's degree in English literature and anthropology. In her 1986 memoir entitled Inner Talking, Joan explained that she dumped her first true love, which was a poet, to marry the right kind of guy, someone with money and status. Well, that right kind of guy was James Sanger, the son of a Bond clothing store's merchandise manager. That marriage lasted just 6 months. During her 20s, Joan lived with her parents and drove a beat-up Buick into Manhattan. I wonder how that went with her status-obsessed mother. She dreamed of being an actress under the stage name of J. Sandra Meredith, an alter ego she created when she was just 8 years old. She auditioned for parts in plays, but had to settle for work as an MC in a sleazy strip club. She appeared as a comedian twice on The Tonight Show with Jack Parr and bombed both times. But after one successful comedy show, her parents encouraged her to perform at their Westchester Country Club. Her routine bombed so badly that her family snuck out through the kitchen. Remember, her mother was obsessed with status. Joan finally tired of living under her parents' thumbs and left home. She slept wherever she could. Sometimes she stayed in a local cheap motel and then left without paying. For months, she was homeless. She eventually returned to her parents' home. Joan took other various jobs while waiting for her big break. She worked as a tour guide at Rockefeller Center, a proofreader at an advertising agency, and a fashion consultant at Bond clothing stores. Remember the guy she married? During this time, Joan's agent, Joanie Rivers, told her that she needed to change her name. Joan Molinski and J. Sandra Meredith were not star names. Perhaps it was a stab at Joanie for dismissing her real name or the one that she had created, or maybe she thought having the same last name as her agent would be beneficial to her career, but Joan Molinski chose Joan Rivers as her stage name. But she said later that Joanie stopped sending her to auditions because she adopted his last name as her stage name. Most people in Joan's situation would have given up. Oh, but not Joan. She kept working and fine-tuning her act. In 1961, Joan was performing in Chicago when she introduced a new character called Rita. Now, Rita was a desperate, needy, aging single woman. It was her first real autobiographical character. Within that character, Joan told raw stories about her bad dates, shame about her body, birth control, and her affair with a married man. Her closing line became, "My name is Joan Rivers, and I put out." The self-loathing act worked. In 1962, Johnny Carson replaced Jack Parr on The Tonight Show. After bombing twice on The Tonight Show and Jack Parr was the host, Jack Parr made sure Joan never got on the show again. But now that Johnny Carson was hosting The Tonight Show, Joan began auditioning for the show. She auditioned 7 times over 3 years and finally got back on that show. On February the 17th, 1965, Joan Rivers performed on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. Joan considered this performance to be her breakthrough. After taping, Johnny Carson told Joan, "You're going to be a star." After this, Joan was a frequent guest on The Tonight Show, which led to spots on The Ed Sullivan Show, The Mike Douglas Show, The Dick Cavett Show, and many, many others. In 1968, Joan got her own talk show called That Show with Joan Rivers. Well, it ran for just 1 season, but had guests including, Johnny Carson, Jerry Lewis, Steve Lawrence, Dick Cavett, Florence Henderson, Kitty Carlisle, Ed Sullivan, and many more. In addition to her work in television, Joan released 2 comedy albums, both of which were popular. From the 1970s onward, Joan Rivers was constantly on television talk shows and game shows. She recorded more comedy albums. She appeared on Broadway, was a regular in Las Vegas, wrote newspaper columns, wrote a dozen books, including Having a Baby Can Be a Scream, bouncing back. I've survived everything, and I mean everything, and you can too. And I hate everyone, starting with me. Throughout her lifetime, Joan seemed to have been scarred from that incident in which the blind date turned to his friend and said, "Why didn't you tell me?" What a shocking rejection that must have been. Joan was determined to keep her weight in check and to keep herself looking her best. She was known for her numerous cosmetic procedures. While in college, she had her nose thinned. Then in '65, she had an eye lift. She had a tummy tuck and numerous other forms of plastic surgery. She wrote a book about it entitled "Men Are Stupid and They Like Big Boobs: A Woman's Guide to Beauty Through Plastic Surgery." In that book, she quipped, "I've had so much plastic surgery, when I die, they will donate my body to Tupperware." Unfortunately, it seems that she fought hard her whole life to look like other people wanted her to look. On August 28, 2014, Joan was having a minor throat procedure at an outpatient clinic in Manhattan when she stopped breathing. Doctors eventually resuscitated her, but she'd been without oxygen for too long. She was transferred to a local hospital and put on life support, but Joan never regained consciousness. On September the 4th, 2014, Joan Alexandra Molinski died from brain damage caused by lack of oxygen. This is just one example of how our words can harm people. What we say to our spouses, our children, our family, our friends, maybe our enemies, has the power to lift them up or to destroy them. Being nice, being kind is not a sign of weakness. I believe it's the ultimate sign of strength. Don't you think? I'm Brad Dison. Thanks for watching. And now you know the rest of the story.